Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Web Application Firewall 101, What is a WAF? My name is Evan Flugrad, and I am joined by today's presenter, Maurice McMullin. Before we begin, I want to draw to your attention the questions panel, which you should see on the right-hand side of your screen. You may need to expand the panel by clicking the plus sign or down arrow for full view. Maurice will take questions at the end of this walkthrough. You are encouraged to submit your questions at any time. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available after its conclusion. I'll now hand it over to Maurice for the demonstration portion of this webinar. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hello and welcome. My name is Maurice McMullin and I'm a product manager at Progress with responsibility for LoadMaster load balancing products. Today, I'm going to do an introduction to what a web application firewall or WAF is. I'll take a look at some of the attacks that a WAF can prevent and also do a quick run through how easy it is to set up WAF on LoadMaster. The fundamental challenge that we face is that web applications have vulnerabilities and that vulnerabilities are not limited to homegrown applications. We regularly see reporting of vulnerabilities in market-leading applications as well. As we can see from the industry analysis, the number of apps with vulnerabilities is significant and nobody can be complacent about how secure their application is. You may ask the question, why would hackers attack me? I'm not a megacorp. I don't hold state secrets. I don't have anything of value for them. Well, it's more complex than that. Yes, extraction, the stealing of data is a key motivator for hackers. While items like credit card details are obviously of value, hackers can also see value in stealing information such as lists of username, as this can be used to craft other attacks. Extortion via ransomware or threatening to publish sensitive information is also a motivator. Again, the size or type of organization is not necessarily significant to make these attempts financially worthwhile for the hackers. Vectoring is where your compromised web application is used to deliver malware to visiting clients. While no actual damage is done to your application on the surface, there is the potential for reputational damage and potentially even having your website blocked by search engines and client protection software. Let's look at the topology of a WAF solution. Protecting against vulnerabilities is a multi-layer challenge, and one of the most significant layers is the web application firewall. So, how does a WAF help? Well, a WAF is a proxy that sits between users and a web application and inspects all traffic for malicious attempts to exploit vulnerabilities, and it can block such attempts from getting to the web application. As part of a layered security approach, LoadMaster WAF can deliver logging and event information to external security and monitoring services. The WAF uses a set of rules to provide protection against a wide range of attacks. This set of rules has evolved over the years to provide coverage for new and emerging threats and is updated automatically on a regular basis by the LoadMaster. The LoadMaster WAF rules provide protection against the major vulnerabilities identified in the OWASP Top 10. OWASP are an independent industry-supported group who focus on application security and who annually conduct research into application security. Over the years, the vulnerabilities in the OWASP Top 10 have changed as new exploits become more common, and older exploits have been mitigated over the years as application vendors fix vulnerabilities. The rules provided by LoadMaster include these older vulnerabilities alongside application-specific protection. We'll take a look at some of these vulnerabilities and how they are exploited. Let's have a look at what an SQL injection attack might look like. This is a very simplified example just to illustrate the attack. An SQL injection attack will attempt to modify the behavior of an SQL statement at the backend server by injecting additional SQL commands or doing some modification to the SQL command. So in this example, we have a form that takes in some variables, and an SQL statement is constructed based on the values in the form fields. In normal use, the form is completed by the user and the SQL statement is constructed as shown. The user that matches on both John and Smith is selected and returned to the user. However, if a malicious actor injects some additional SQL via the surname field, the results returned are completely different. As 1 equals 1 is always true, then the OR statement with family name will always return true. As a result, the SQL statement is actually selecting all users with the first name John, not exactly what was originally intended by the developer. This is a simplistic example. In extreme cases, it shows how a web application may be exploited to deliver more data than was intended. Variants of this attack could actually execute SQL drop statements, for example, to delete parts of a database. So protecting against injection is still one of the top vulnerabilities and has been for many years. Another type of vulnerability is broken access control, where a user can act on resources outside their intended permissions. In this example, we see a normal access where a user accesses their own account. However, if we modify the parameter on the HTTP request, they're allowed to access someone else's account. Again, not exactly a desirable outcome. The examples shown here are very simplistic. Applications should be coded much better than this, but they still may be susceptible to well-crafted attacks designed to exploit a very specific weakness. Application weaknesses, they may be inherited from third-party or open source components, which when updated may introduce new vulnerabilities. This is why application protection should be ongoing and not just based on periodical security checks, such as application penetration tests. The cve.mitre.org site provides a searchable list of discovered vulnerabilities that you can use to see what weaknesses may be in your applications or in the components that they use. A lot of these vulnerabilities may be historical and may already have been fixed by updates from the developer even before the CVE notice was published. Interestingly, I had a quick look on the CVE list and did a search on SQL, and this was in September 2022. And there at the top of the list was an application that had the 1 equals 1 SQL vulnerability. So some of these old vulnerabilities are still hanging around in applications. These vulnerabilities do exist. They exist in all types of applications and application components and are constantly being discovered and exploited by hackers. Now let's look at how to set up WAF on LoadMaster and what options are available to fine-tune the WAF for your application. We'll assume that the virtual service for the application is already configured on LoadMaster. From there, enabling WAF on the LoadMaster is easy. It's just a tick box. One thing to note is that WAF is CPU intensive and may require additional resources in a virtual environment, assigning more memory, more CPU. On a hardware platform, you may need to size for a bigger appliance. You can fine-tune how sensitive the WAF is by setting the anomaly scoring threshold. Each trigger detection in a request raises the anomaly score. Most detections will add approximately 5 to the overall score. It's good to leave it at this default value for a while to assess how the WAF and your application are interacting. The paranoia level defines how strict the WAF engine implements the rules. You can raise the paranoia level in advanced settings and also test for higher levels of paranoia without actually block any traffic as part of the refinement of the WAF implementation. By adjusting the paranoia level and the anomaly scoring threshold, you can get to that desired point of not blocking legitimate traffic, yet providing sufficient protection to detect and prevent attacks. Which sets of rules to implement are selectable? So if, for example, you don't use PHP, you can disable the PHP rules. The rules are grouped around specific OWASP vulnerabilities and common development tool sets and deployment frameworks. There are also groups of rules focused on enforcing best security practices, for example, for the HTTP protocol. In each of the rule categories, you can enable and disable specific rules, providing further granular control. You can also augment the provided rules with your own custom rules to address specific application scenarios. There is documentation on the LoadMaster support site on how to write custom rules, and of course our support team are always there to assist as well. The provided rules also include some application-specific rule sets that are fine-tuned to simplify deployment of WAF for these workloads. Another very useful feature included with the LoadMaster WAF is IP reputation blocking. As part of the standard WAF rule set, we include an IP reputation list. This list includes IP addresses that have been identified as sources of bad actors. By enabling this, all these bad actor IPs are blocked from establishing connections. This list gets the same regular updates alongside the rules. You can do further IP blocking by country under the advanced WAF settings. As part of the IP reputation update, IP address lists by country are provided to allow blocking of a complete region. Simply select the countries from the list and traffic from known IP address ranges in that country will be blocked. It's not 100% foolproof as it won't detect VPN usage, and some IP blocks, such as, let's say, a large corporate network or whatever, may span multiple countries. I hope that this introduction to WAF in general and specifically on how LoadMaster delivers advanced web protection was useful and showed how LoadMaster makes WAF easy and provides the ongoing protection for all your application workloads. The easiest way to get started is to download a LoadMaster trial from kemptechnologies.com and to deploy it and configure the WAF. This can easily be done in parallel to your live traffic, so you won't have any impact on your existing users.
All right, thank you so much, Maurice. We will now be taking questions. So I ask you to please submit your questions in the panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will get to those as they are received. Maurice, I will invite you to come back on for some questions that we had pre-submitted. I'll start with a question here. This is more of a two-part question, but can you summarize and review the different attack types that a WAF can prevent? Likewise, give us a little bit of a summary of WAF protection against OWASP top 10 attacks. And for our viewers who might not be familiar, could you explain a little bit more about OWASP, how often that is updated, and just more background there?
Okay. Quite a long question. The types of attacks that are protected against. Again, we look at the OWASP top 10, and there's that's constantly changing. A lot of these are, let's say, exploitations of potentially a bad implementation. Okay, so things like broken access controls, that idea that you can just change your URL and move across, those type of things. But there's other things in there as well within the OWASP top 10 where people have misconfigured some security parameters. They're using a mixture of HTTP and HTTPS, providing ways for hackers to exploit that. There's one of the security risks is the using vulnerable or outdated components. Somebody decides to build a website using a component, and suddenly the developer decides to move on to something else. So you're left with something that's not maintained. It's got vulnerabilities in there. That is seen as something that gets exploited within. Again, it's there on the OWASP top 10 list. So again, it's a lot of it is providing that layer of protection through looking at known patterns that are attacks on various applications and providing that protection against them. The second part of that question, it's now escaped my mind. It's quite a long question. Can you just repeat it for me?
Yeah.
Sorry. It was more the how often is OWASP updated, etc.
Right.
Yeah.
Just more generalized insight
Yeah.
into OWASP,
Yeah.
how often
Okay.
that list is updated. And
Right.
yeah.
So the list is updated every year, and it's a reflection of what the OWASP organization have discovered through their research. And okay, the latest version is the 2021 list. 2022 will come out after they've completed their research for this year. The OWASP.org website is actually very, very comprehensive. That's OWASP.org. Okay, it'll give you the list, etc., but it'll also give you a deep dive into the vulnerabilities, whether that's from the statistics there to show you the prevalence of those vulnerabilities, or to look at the actual technical exploits that how they actually work, what a hacker may do to actually exploit a vulnerability. So there's quite a lot of information there if anybody wants to go there. Okay.
That's great. Thank you so much. I know that was a longer question there, and thanks to everybody that's submitted questions so far.
Right.
Continue to send those in, and we'll get to them. I see there's a question. I have a LoadMaster 3000 virtual load balancer. How do I activate WAF on that? If you could maybe share on kind of a high level their initial steps to get started.
Okay, so in the virtual load balancer, first of all, the WAF capability, depends on the support subscription that you have. So you need to have an Enterprise Plus subscription there. And it is as simple as I showed there. If you already have your virtual service enabled, you can just click on the WAF button to enable WAF. Now, my suggestion would be, rather than going in there and doing that, is to download a trial, deploy it in parallel, do your WAF experiment and tuning there out of band, so that you're not impacting on existing traffic. So, but once you're happy with it, you understand your environment and can see how the WAF can provide protection without impacting on regular traffic, then it's simply a case of, you can, if you don't have an Enterprise Plus subscription currently, you can upgrade to that, and that'll enable the tick box to enable WAF, and from there you can proceed.
Thank you.
Okay, so sorry, I can see some of the questions coming in here now as well. So what is the risk for false positives, and how is it logged and troubleshooted? So yeah, there's always a risk of false positives, just by the nature, all applications, have their own little quirks, and what works for one may not work for another. So you have that challenge of, not interrupting normal business. There is in the user interface, and you may have noticed it there in one of the screenshots, that there is a troubleshooting guide there, so you can see the latest rules that have been fired, what caused them, etc., and that gives you insight into how you can fine-tune the WAF to reduce that false positive. Okay, there's another question here. How do we are able to detect attacks when the traffic is encrypted? Interesting. Okay, if the traffic is encrypted end-to-end from the client to the web server, then we cannot see inside it, and therefore we can't apply any WAF controls. However, the normal way that the load balancer works is it's providing SSL offload, so that the traffic's being decrypted at the load balancer, and it's in the clear within the load balancer and can be inspected by the WAF engine at that stage, and then optionally re-encrypted and sent to the application servers. Right. And there's a question here. On my LoadMaster, I see two WAF options. One is legacy and one is WAF. What is the difference? The legacy WAF used a rule set that was produced commercially by an organization that has now stopped doing that. So it behaved in a slightly different way. So that is being deprecated there in terms of ongoing updates to that rule set. So that provides a way for customers to still use the legacy system, but have a way as well of looking at the new way of implementing WAF. So that's the difference. And there's also a question. Can the default rules per the paranoia setting be adjusted in any way, or do you have to create exceptions? The impact of any rule can be adjusted by the paranoia setting. So within the default rules, the paranoia setting is saying how aggressively the engine is going to apply that rule. So at a lower paranoia setting, something might get through, and a higher paranoia setting, it might get blocked. So it's a matter of fine-tuning that, and you may have to create rules to have exceptions to get around that, because something may get triggered at a very low paranoia level with your application. So it's this is part of that fine tuning and refinement that you would do prior to deployment to get that balance between providing maximum protection but still allowing your users to access the application. And there's a question, what is the better practice, raise the anomaly scoring threshold or the paranoia level? I will hold my hands up and say I am not 100% sure of which is the best way to do that. So I apologize, but we will try and get something back on that there. Have we a mechanism for adding comments on this here, Evan, afterwards?
Yeah, we can.
We can come back to that. I honestly, I can't answer that there with any authority.
Sure. So thank you for that question. And any more questions that anybody has, feel free to continue to add those. And we will take a few more minutes here to answer those questions. I know we have a few more that were pre-submitted that we can roll through. One, Maurice, is are any application modifications required to achieve WAF protection using the LoadMaster?
No is probably the short answer, but again, there may be some oddball applications out there that have something that doesn't work. But in general, there's it is a case of dropping the WAF in front of your web application and proxying your client traffic through the LoadMaster, through the web application firewall to your web application. So no changes required on the application side.
Perfect. Another question there is for organizations who are looking to deploy the LoadMaster's WAF, what are their deployment options?
The WAF is available on all of the LoadMaster platforms, with the exception of the LoadMaster X1 hardware platform. The reason for that is that WAF does consume additional resources. It's a little bit more CPU intensive, needs a bit more memory, but it's available on all the hardware platforms apart from the X1, all the virtual platforms. So that's either on a local hypervisor or in any of the supported cloud platforms as well. So it's available everywhere. And again, it's on whether you're on a perpetual license or you're on a subscription pay as you go, for example, in the cloud, it's available there as well.
Thank you. One more that we have here is, can you have different WAF configurations for different applications on the same LoadMaster?
Yes, is the short answer. The WAF is implemented on a pair virtual service basis. So, for example, you could have an application that has a web aspect to it and an API, and you can set up two virtual services, one for the web part, one for the API part, and each could have a different WAF configuration because you're trying to protect against different things on both potentially. So yes, absolutely, we can have multiple WAF configurations on a single LoadMaster.
Great to hear. One more that we have here is if you can add to the list of blocked IP addresses, is that a possibility with the LoadMaster WAF?
Yeah. Yes is a short answer. There's a couple of different ways to create custom blocking of IP addresses or even subnets. One way is using the WAF and creating a custom rule. Another is to define a custom ACL or access control list. Either way works. It's just a matter of preference. The ACLs are defined via the user interface, and might suit better for somebody not familiar with the syntax of WAF rules. But the LoadMaster support site provides guidance on creating custom rules for the WAF. And if my memory serves me correctly, there's actually some examples there of creating WAF rules for blocking specific IP addresses or a range of IP addresses. So there's different ways of doing it, either using the WAF or with ACLs.
Sure. And two more questions that we have here. And I'd remind everyone that if you have any questions, go ahead and submit those. We'll continue to take questions for a few more minutes here. Maurice, could you share what the primary source of attacks on web applications, what that is?
Okay, so I'm not sure what people mean by source, but if we look at in general, the source is generally they're bot networks. So it's a case of you've got the bots are crawling the internet looking for victims, and being randomly picked by a bot is normally the reason for an attack. If somebody wanted to do a targeted attack, it's probably going to be a bit more finessed, a bit more manual, a bit more focused on your particular application. So in general, it's like it's a drive-by. You're just getting caught by the bot doing it. So it's bot-based, and in terms of source, that could be from anywhere. It's not just the usual suspects of a North Korea or a Russia that maybe the actual source of your attack in terms of where the traffic is coming from, because bots will use compromised home computers and they pick them up all around the world globally. So you could have an attack that is predominantly coming from the US, the UK, Germany, other regions. It's not necessarily where the hackers are physically located, but it's more where the compromised devices are. Okay, so in terms of the source, it's bots, and it can be from absolutely anywhere. So, for example, if you decide to block, if you're running, let's say, a site, and you know that all your customers are within your own country, blocking all the other countries and just allowing your own may not give you that protection, because compromised devices in your own country could potentially attack you.
That's great. And I see another question popped into the chat there. Can we combine WAF with Duo?
Duo. Oh, with Duo for authentication.
Yeah.
I'm not overly familiar with. Sorry, I'm not familiar with what mean there by Duo Auth, but we do provide authentication on the LoadMaster. It works. We can authenticate. Once authenticated, all traffic is subjected to the WAF as well. So in that sense, they're combined. I'm not sure if you're looking for something a bit deeper on that in terms of combining WAF with Duo.
Sure. Yeah. One other question here. So you mentioned WAF as one layer of security. To achieve layered security for web applications, what other layers should one consider beyond the WAF itself?
Oh, that's another leading question. Yeah, how long is a piece of string? There's a couple of basic things. Like security is that multiple layers, and it's a lot of different things. But just focusing on, let's say, the application security part, I would say that regular patching of applications to latest versions is good practice. Generally vendors are doing some sort of penetration testing, attack testing on their own applications. They're discovering vulnerabilities, whether they get introduced by a new bit of functionality has been developed, or they've got an updated library, whether it's an open source or from a third party. So they'll discover those, they'll patch them up, etc. So that's the first thing to say, do your patching regularly. Looking at a sort of a bigger picture, ways of sort of preventing attacks, or minimizing the chances of attack. Sometimes something as simple as a CAPTCHA can work. Now, again, some people think that very annoying, but providing a CAPTCHA so that people have to solve the problem, whether it's a simple ticking "I'm not a robot" or it's searching for traffic lights or whatever it might be, that can be enough to be a barrier for these bot-based attacks, where either they can't solve the CAPTCHA, or they've made a decision that, okay, we can't be bothered solving CAPTCHAs. We've got, it's back to that thing about you don't have to outrun the lion that's chasing you, you just have to outrun the other guy. So that can provide the protection. Potentially, you could look at using authentication there. I know we mentioned, somebody mentioned dual auth there, but using authentication, pre-authentication, is a good idea. So that stops anybody from getting near any of your web properties until they've successfully authenticated. And then you can have all sorts of authentication schemes there with two-factor authentication, and then get into zero trust network access, where etc. So you can do a lot with authentication to make sure that somebody doesn't make it as difficult for somebody to get through to exploit your application. But in terms of layers, we can then start going out and looking at all sorts of other layers in there, in terms of there's client-side security, there's DDoS, there's a lot of protections and layers of security in there, and some of it is as well, when if you're developing applications in-house, there are tool sets there to test application security. And there's also, actually, on the OWASP website, they provide a tool called ZAP, which allows you to actually do your own testing against your own web properties as well. So that might be a useful thing to use as well.
That's fantastic. So I'd give one final opportunity for anybody to ask any final questions here before we wrap up. Maurice, I thought while we allow another minute or two, you could maybe share next steps for anybody interested in deploying a WAF, and then also steps they might take to test the WAF.
Yeah. The simplest way is, as I mentioned, is if you download a trial. The trial version includes all the WAF functionality in there, and just to place it, let's say, on a virtual machine on your desktop, wherever, and point that at your web application. Configure the WAF, see how your application behaves using the WAF. Use tools like the ZAP tool that I mentioned, or there's quite a number of other testing tools out there that will try to attack your website. So you can use those to do a test to see how the WAF is performing, and that'll allow you to adjust all the parameters to get you the maximum amount of protection there, while still allowing the application to function. So that'll give you that sort of confidence that, hey, this will work for me. Okay, so the simplest way is just to, as I say, get the trial, run it up, and then when you're happy with that, you'll be able to take your knowledge into a production environment.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And Maurice, thank you for taking the time to answer all our questions today. If no more questions, we will conclude today's webinar. Thanks all for attending. Video of this webinar will be available on demand to you shortly. So thank you so much and have a great day.